And welcome everybody to the Fandom Zone. It is the most earth-breaking, crown-shaking, but never media show money taking. The man, the myth, the legend, the most electrifying Sunday reviewer here on YouTube, Mr. General Dave Filoni Zod. Why did I use that last part? I mean, look at me, partner. I'm stylish. And today I have everybody's favorite Australian reviewer, the only man I trust from the land down under. It is Mr. Stevie J Reviews, and welcome to LB, who I honestly have been missing, man. You know what? Not to shill for anyone, because I never shill for the media, but I will shill for a friend. Mr. LB has been killing it with his videos, so kudos to you, sir. Keep on doing all of the great content that you're making and pissing people off, because apparently when you have a difference of opinion, you're an Uncle Tom, you're a racist, you're a homophobe, xenophobe, every phobe that there ever was. So I think LB is doing stellar work. I measure our work. The more we piss people off, the better we're doing.
It does work that way sometimes. G'day, LB.
Yeah, you know how those Snyder fans are. Like me and PB pissed off a bunch of them, so we must be doing great work on that front. So, Mr. Stevie J, how are you doing? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your channel.
I'm doing really well, mate. Doing really well. Yeah, got the Stevie J Reviews channel, doing a whole bunch of movie reviews and talking about movie news as well. One of my most recent reviews was Da 5 Bloods and why that movie sucks. Yep, come at me. I said it. That's right. It actually sucks. It's not a good movie at all. And I suppose something else that's been tweaking my interest lately is cancel culture and how much I dislike that. But either way, we are here to talk about Alita today.
Yes, this is going to be an interesting talk for me because I was not one of the people who were jumping on the hype train for the same reasons as everyone else was when this movie came out. And I felt like the channels that were covering this were only covering it because they looked at it as a rallying cry against Captain Marvel, the whole anti, SJW thing that's been going on. And so I felt like this movie wasn't really in-depthly explored for all of the good points, and that even the negative points weren't really brought out. And as good of a movie as this is, it does have a lot of glaring issues within this movie, as any movie does. I mean, it is not necessarily this beacon of hope that everyone makes it out to be. On the flip side of that, it's not as simplistic as the preferred critics would have you think of it either. It's one of those movies that had it come out at a different time period, A, I think it would have did a lot better in the box office, and B, I think it would have gotten average reviews. People would have liked it, but because of where it was placed, the current situation with Marvel, doing Captain Marvel, and that whole fiasco, it just was one of those movies that fell in a weird place. And I'm glad we're talking about it because I feel like me and you could actually bring up specifics about this movie, actually talk about both the positives and the negatives. And I know you love this, and I own it on DVD myself. So I like the movie just for different reasons than most people. So do you, being that you're the facts man here, I do got the Wikipedia information, but do you want to kind of go through our normal rundown, who directed it, when it came out, all that jazz? That stuff's kind of with me.
Yeah, for sure, mate. No worries. Look, and first of all, I do agree to an extent that there probably was a lot of people out there who were jumping on the Alita bandwagon because at the time Captain Marvel was less than impressive, and and of course, Brie Larson came out and she had all the negative promotion around the film and all that sort of thing. So there probably is an element to that, I think. And also something that probably impacted the box office of Alita, at least in my opinion, is the fact that Captain Marvel came out at the same time, because there was obviously a lot more marketing going to Captain Marvel and a lot more talk and hype about Captain Marvel than there was about Alita. So I think it goes a little bit both ways. But also would agree that Alita was, I really liked it. I went and saw it and I was really impressed with it. And then, on subsequent viewings, it actually, there's a few little errors there and little things that I would critique, which we will. But essentially, Alita, if anybody doesn't know, it was a 2019 sci-fi slash cyberpunk film, really, that was directed by Robert Rodriguez and produced by James Cameron, who actually had the rights to it a long, long time ago. It grossed 404 million at the box office, and it had a budget of 170 million. So that's another point of contention, is to whether or not this actually did break even or turn a profit. So the main two actors in it are Christoph Waltz and Rosa Salazar. And it also has Jennifer Connelly, Mahershala Ali, and a few others as well. But that's basically the rundown, I guess. So what did you want to get into first, my friend? Did you want to get into the cast?
Yeah, let's go to the cast because that's one of my sources of contention with this film. Now, don't get me wrong. Everybody, I think and I believe that anyone who's in the chat or who will watch this later can agree that there's a lot of good people in this movie, but they don't necessarily get utilized to their fullest potential. I mean, Jennifer Connelly is an amazing actress, and I feel like she is just there in this movie. And look, this was based on a manga and an anime. I followed them both. Jennifer Connelly's role in those were actually a lot more important, but I feel like because of time constraints, maybe, or as much as he was packing into this film, that their roles kind of got relegated to like it almost feels like these big stars were like cameos. And I mean, these are stars you would want to highlight. I mean, Marshall Ali is a great actor, and I felt like him too. You take those two out of this movie when you really think about it, and what do they add? You could have had anybody else do Marshall Ali's part. You could have had anyone else do Jennifer Connelly's part. They don't feel essential at all to the story, and I felt like that waste. Like when you really think about it, most of the plot revolves around Christoph Waltz and uh, Rosaria more than any of the other actors, really. And that to me is one of the things with this casting that in particular bothered me. Now, I thought that when they were on screen, they did good performances. No one really phoned it in, but it still felt kind of like a waste of some talent given the casting.
Yeah, look, I'd agree with those points. I mean, uh, Jennifer Connelly and Mahershala Ali are very good actors in their own right. And at the time, Mahershala Ali was like on fire as well. That was the time when he was really, really, popular. He was kicking goals in Hollywood. So it was a little bit odd that they were written that way, and their parts were kind of small. I mean, both like you said, they, for what they had to do, did a good job, as they always do, but they were definitely underutilized. The only other issue I had with the casting was Kian Johnson, who played Hugo. Now, I'll get into a little bit later on about the relationships and my critiques, but yeah, I just felt like he was, could have been a miscasting, or it just could have been his particular acting ability. I'm not sure, but I felt like those three, so Jennifer Connelly, Mahershala Ali, were both good castings, but their roles weren't important enough or big enough for who they were. And Kean Johnson, I just didn't feel like he was right. There was something off about the Hugo character. So, yeah, I suppose for me, the absolute highlights, to go the other way, Rosa Salazar was amazing, and obviously it was motion capture, but her voice, I mentioned this in my original review. Her voice was really captivating to me when I first watched the movie. It was something that I just wanted to keep listening to, and even though it was motion capture, she still did all the fight scenes and everything, which I thought she did a great job in. And by far, the main emphasis and the main story of the film is really about Rosa Salazar's character, Alita, and Christoph Waltz, Dr. Ito, and their relationship, which was definitely deep and very interesting to me.
Yeah, I feel like if you take out their specific bond and really the inverse, if we have one metric to compare to, which unfortunately is Captain Marvel, because it's not like we're doing apples to oranges. When you really think about both the storylines for Captain Marvel and Alita Battle Angel, they're both running the same theme, right? Someone is on Earth. They lost their memory. They got to do things. They got to remember who they were. They got to get their powers back. It's essentially the same storyline between both movies. But the huge difference, and I think where the comparison comes in for people, is how the female characters are portrayed. You have a plank of wood and boring subtext and things like that from Captain Marvel, and things that just I wouldn't necessarily it was Brie Larson's performance so much as the writing that hindered her performance, and a combination of just bad putting scenes together and stuff. Everything was just kind of done half-assed, at least in my opinion. Whereas with Alita Battle Angel, this movie really does fall apart without her playing this role, because on the inverse of that, she completely put a lot of emotion and heart. I brought when she was sad, I brought when she was angry, and she really has a level of acting, and really a big thing here for a CGI character. The facial expressions are very spot on, and the way she conveys things within her movements, her body language, and everything else like that for a CGI character is quite amazing and stunning, and conveys a lot. So even if you don't necessarily get behind everything that the movie chooses to do, their relationship is the core, is the foundation. If you don't have their relationship in this movie, at least honestly, in my opinion, the whole thing falls apart. Because like you said, the Hugo thing, there was some reasons why that kind of seemed like nothing, and I'll get into that because it relates to the books, and I'll tell you why I feel like this whole thing feels compacted down. But in essence, their relationship to me really keeps this movie going. And don't get me wrong, it's a James Cameron film. James Cameron and Rodriguez, if there's one thing these guys can do better than anyone else in the business, is action. And the action, the fight scenes, the choreographs, the stunts, the utilization of the 3D technology, these are all things that are in their field, and they don't slack off about it. You can clearly see they don't spare any expense with it. So those things too are highlights of the movie. So when you have a really strong main character, a really strong relationship between the main and the support, and then really strong action, you do have the bones and the structure to keep audiences engaged in your film. It's when you start getting to the other aspects of the story is when this thing kind of goes a little bit in every different direction, and you see where they had a really hard time trying to pick and choose which way they wanted to go with this thing. And before we really dive into that, just to give everyone some context, this is based on a manga series. If you guys don't know what that is, it's like the Japanese equivalent of a comic book. And there is like 26 to 30 volumes within this manga. James Cameron adapted the first 10, and I know because I've read this. He did from the Alita landing and her memory gap, which is a whole arc. He did the motorball, which is its own arc, and he did the Judicator thing, which is its own arc, or the hunters. where did I get Judicator from? I was doing a review for something else, but he did that whole arc. These are three separate storylines he put into one movie. So when you see the Hugo character, it doesn't make sense because he did that whole love story thing compacted as well. And it's one of my issues with the movie, which is why when you're watching it as a viewer and you know nothing about Alita, you don't know anything about the manga, you don't know about the anime, you don't know anything about that, as just a casual moviegoer, you're looking at this and going, how do we get from here to here? Why is there a jump from here to here? And I understood it because I read them, I saw the anime, so I knew exactly where the break was. But that was an issue that a lot of people had with this movie, was how it seemed to jump from story beat to story beat very quickly. So, and I don't know if you noticed that yourself while watching this film.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about the fact that you read the manga, because I haven't read the manga at all. I'm just basing everything that I talk about on the film alone. And look, I did notice some pacing issues at points. It seemed to, in certain points, go a little bit too slow, and then it really got fast paced, and it escalated to that really quickly. But in terms of the romance thing with Hugo, I mean, without reading the manga, like I said, it was actually really just the chemistry between the two wasn't there for me. And what it felt like was like a Saved by the Bell kind of romance, like a high school, like a really cheesy high school kind of romance. Now, the problem for me wasn't with Alita's character. Now, yes, they did. I do get the feeling that they crammed a lot into the movie, but I feel like the relationship was very forced, and Hugo, whether it was just the actor or it was how he was written, but the actor to me just kept doing this awkward little smile and head tilt all the time. That was like his little go-to thing, and it really irritated me. I was like, "What are you doing, mate? Stop doing that. It's really it's really bugging me." And what I sort of give a reason for that, which is that his acting ability is not that good. He doesn't have that good a range with his acting. But the relationship between the two of them, to me, it just didn't have that chemistry. It really could have. They could have probably used a different actor and actually got a better result, because I didn't feel like the Hugo character had any depth. And there were some interesting things going on with his character as well, really, because he was betraying her essentially, and he was working for the bad guys, chopping up body parts of the cyborgs and things like that. So there was a little bit of depth and some interest there with his character, but I felt like it just didn't come across well because the actor was not doing a good job. And that was the same with the romance as well.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like one of those weird romances too, because I could see on her end where like she was like diving into it and everything and what they were trying to get across because she's new and stuff like that. But then when you don't have him giving the same kind of chemistry that she's giving, it kind of almost feels like a stalkerish thing because she's like, I'll rip out my heart for you. I'm like, whoa, we just met. Like, we could do the heart thing like a year or two in. This chick is just like taking out her heart and be like, you could sell this. And I'm like, whoa. So when you get that kind of like, what it felt like exactly what you're saying, that one actor or actress could pull off that kind of a romance that I felt like he was going for, like a speed through kind of thing. Because, like I said, I read the mangas, I saw the anime, and their love is supposed to be kind of like one of the big points for Alita. It's part of her growth and development that this guy essentially, and spoilers, my God, if you haven't seen this, we're talking spoilers anyways, but when he dies, that's supposed to be another evolution of her character. But like you said, because of how he plays the role, and I'm not even going to really lay most of it on the actor. I've seen the kid in other stuff. He's not that bad, but I don't think he's that seasoned for what the role required. And I'm going to even say some of the writing might have been kind of glazed over in that part. And the direction too, Because yeah, that smile thing he did annoyed the crap out of me too. It's like when I got to those scenes, even when I'm watching it again on DVD, I just kind of like skip. Like, all right, I don't need to see this. But I mean, it's that it's the both that she's too strong on her playing that love story, and he's not. He doesn't have enough like charisma to really carry that. So it kind of feels like an unbalanced love. Like she's given everything,
Mm.
and he's just kind of there. And I don't think that's what they were going for. And when you have two actors not on the same wavelength, you get the love story you got. I wouldn't
Yeah.
call it on the level of Star Wars bad, but you know, like you said, it was
Yeah.
very Saved by the Bell. It wasn't like prequel bad, George Lucas writing a love story bad, but it just wasn't there.
Yeah. Look, it also could have been just the fact that he just didn't have that range, because a specific example would be the fact that he was essentially working for the bad guys and he was ripping off cyborg parts and things like that. So that could have been the reason why the two, or he was a little bit standoffish, or you had her being a bit of a stalker, and then he wasn't quite into it. And they could have actually, if his acting was really good, that would have actually been able to be translated on screen simply through his expression, that he was feeling some guilt over what he was doing in the background, or some further depth to it like that. But instead, we just got that little awkward smile and the head tilt. So yeah, it just didn't work for me. But on the on the flip side of that, uh, the CGI character Alita, or Rosa Salazar, her emotion and expression was amazing, and a lot of that credit's got to go to the digital production team. So this was done by Weta Productions, and they've done a lot of other pretty high profile films. I mean, they're established well and truly in the industry, but they did the Lord of the Rings trilogy, they did Avatar, they did X-Men movies, Man of Steel. They did a whole lot of movies where they were the ones doing the CGI, and I feel like for me, this one was one of the best I think I've ever seen, particularly when it comes to Alita's character and the way that she came across on screen, because you had tears and all those expressions that you would expect from almost from a human, all came through across on the screen. And let's not forget the visuals of the fight scenes, which were freaking awesome. Man, I love the.
Let me talk
I,
about the fight scene for a second. Not to cut you off, but there's something I just got to get out. I hated how they've used slow motion in recent years. Like, I feel like since 300, that shit has been so played out, but like everything's got to stop and people are going like this, since Matrix and 300, they just been overdosing on the slow motion. But here, as you said, the CGI itself and the special effects blend seamlessly into the world. And when you have something like that, where it feels like there's a CGI character interacting with the real world, and that the CGI doesn't feel like CGI necessarily, it didn't feel like CGI in this world. It felt out of place, but not to where my eyes were distracted from it. So when you get to those amazing fight scenes and things like that, and the way that they worked the camera, it to me made those battles far more intense. I mean, even slow motion in this movie, I felt was excellently utilized, like done exactly where it needed to be to get that dramatic effect, or for me to see something that I wouldn't be able to see if this was like a normal battle. If they're going at normal speed, I felt like the way they slowed things down was because, like, hey, these are two robots fighting, and the human eye wouldn't be able to catch this kind of thing. So yeah, to your point, the battles and the way they utilize her expressions, and look, it's not just the battle scenes either. The details they give a CGI character is amazing, and how I always wanted them to utilize it. Her crying and things like that is it's spectacular to watch.
Yeah, well, you're spot on with the blending and everything like that, and how it all meshed together. I think there's a point to be made that, given that the film was always going to be a lot of CGI, and the characters being cyborgs were going to be CGI, it also works in to their advantage a little bit, because there's not so much blending that has to be done between what's real world and what's CGI. But that being said, you still got to get it right. And I think that the color grading is a really big thing when it comes to CGI, because we see so much of it. And Justice League is an example that the color grading makes such a difference on how real it feels, because you've got to make it look realistic. And it's got to be consistent for the world that you've built. And I felt like Alita was really good at that. All the color grading and all of the actual world that they established was consistent throughout the film, whether it was the characters or whether it was the streets or the sky, or down underneath in the drainage system where they're having the fights down there. I felt like it was all consistent throughout, and that does wonders for your finished product when you can keep consistent like that, and you don't have. It would have been really easy with the team that they had working on this and Weta Productions and everything to really go over the top with the CGI and the color grading and the way that it looks and the tone of it, because they just had so much to work with. And given that it was an actual CGI world, really, they could have really gone over the top with it, but they didn't. And I felt like that was a real positive for this, because they built the world and it felt the same. It felt consistent all the way through. And so, apart from what we talked about with the disconnect with Hugo, it actually, you stayed in that world throughout the whole film.
Speaking of the world, I did take one issue, and maybe this is a small nitpick. And, I don't want anyone to ever accuse us that we're always on the same page with everything, because the last movies we reviewed, we've pretty much been on the same page. But for this one, I've took issue with a certain line in this movie where he talks about like how this city is, you gotta scrap to survive and things like that. But you're looking at the city, and I go, Hugo's place is nicer than mine. Like, I'm not seeing where the struggle is here. You have those kids playing the motorball.
Well, hang on a minute. Does that talk about Hugo's world or your world?
No, I mean, like, they're trying to give us this. Okay, they're trying to sell us that everybody wants to go to this world above. And don't get me wrong, we never get to see what the world above is. So it could be like, the 16th chapel up there. We don't know, because we only get a glimpse of that shot towards the end of the film where you're like, oh, wait, well, it is pretty nice, but we never see the structures or anything. So when you have this place that's supposed to be like the regular, everybody lives there, but it looks nice, really nice, it kind of hard to sell this theme that's throughout the movie and essentially part of his character, that, oh, he wants to get up top because it's so much better, and
So
maybe it's a small nitpick, but it really grinded me in the movie, because I'm like, dude, your apartment is nice, these houses are nice, what are you talking about?
yeah, but okay, that's a fair point. But do you think that could be explained by the fact that he's getting paid extra cash to pull apart cyborgs and sell the parts and stuff like that? And he's working for the bad guys. He's probably getting a whole lot of dough, a whole lot of cashola from doing that. So maybe that's why he's got a nice apartment.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Sometimes with these movies, right? And like you said, the clean and the polish also kind of works against it, because the only part that I really get a sense of it being shitty is when they find Alita in the dumpster, right? That big dumpster area, where they have the cyborg scrap parts. That, to me, I'm like, okay, that's a little bit of a shitty location. But the rest of the world, I don't ever get this feeling by looking at the people interacting with each other and all the merchants and things like that. I don't feel the same thing as, say, I go from here to New York, right? And I go into the Bronx. And you're in the Bronx or Brooklyn or whatever. You know what I mean? It's got that street feel. Everything's kind of dingy and dirty. You see homeless guy off to the side. You might hear a couple gunshots here and there. it feels like if they tell you, yeah, that's the ghetto, you're like, oh shit, that is exactly as advertised. And you have this one character running around talking about how bad this place is, but you don't really see that, and you don't get a real sense of it unless you like go where the hunters are and stuff like that. There, you feel like there's a rough, tough crowd. That bar kind of has that like seedy feel to it. But other than that, the rest of the movie, I didn't get what was so bad, which kind of takes me out of it and kind of invalidates what Hugo's talking about and why he has this big important quest, because I don't ever get a sense that these people are really much struggling and stuff like that. And maybe it's a small nitpick, but I think if you're going to make that a key part of your character's storyline, you got to kind of highlight and show things and reasons why he wants to get out of here. Like maybe show someone getting, shot or taken off the street because they talk bad about that guy. I forget the name of the guy Edward Norton was playing, but show these people start disappearing, and then you're like, oh shit, it looks nice, but there is really shady stuff going on. And we don't get a sense of that really until the end of the movie, and you see what the price is to go to Zion and all of that. So it's like I kind of just get taken out a little bit when he's telling me, oh yeah, it's terrible, this is the worst place ever, come up to my luxurious space up here.
Yeah, well, I think you got confused with the Matrix there because you called it Zion instead of Zolan.
I know.
But look, I tell you what, I think this might be one of our first little disagreements, because when I was sitting in the cinema watching this, I actually did get the impression that it was a shitty city, and it might have been when she's walking down the street and there's just people everywhere. It's kind of a mess, and those rollerball kids that all seem to be basically homeless. But I suppose I'll essentially disagree, but there's one point I guess they could have done better, which probably is that rollerball scene. They could have focused a little bit more, just for a few seconds, on a couple of those rollerball kids. Just have even one scene, just displaying their hardship, just a little bit. That probably would have added a little more to it. But for me, watching it at the kinema, or the cinema as most people call it, I actually did get that feel. I got that sort of gritty feel from it. But look,
I'm the opposite. I didn't feel it until the bar scene. Like once the bar scene hit and she gets into the world of the hunters, or like they're attacked in the alleyway, that's where I was like, okay, now I'm starting to see where you're getting kind of like, oh, there is a darker underbelly to this.
Yeah.
But
Well, look, I suppose for me, they did. So I said before they kept it consistent, and what I meant by that was the technical side of it. But in terms of the themes of the movie and the tonal shifts, they actually did a really good job, because in the beginning, when we see that world, and when Alita first gets up and starts walking around, the color is very bright. It's that kind of sandy, bright color, and so it's symbolizing her innocence and her optimism about finding out who she is. She doesn't know what's going on, and to her, everything's just brand new. So she tastes chocolate for the first time. She's all innocent and everything. So the color scheme there is very bright, and it just symbolizes that innocence and hope that she has. And then as the movie progresses and she finds out more, then we start getting into that darker alleyway kind of feel of it. And from there, it almost stays that way for the rest of the film, in that kind of darker tone, which I think was done on purpose. I wouldn't say it was it was an accident or a byproduct of what they were doing. I think that was a definite decision to do. And for me, it actually really worked, because I remember watching it for the first time thinking, this is a really innocent character. And it makes sense. She's just woken up, doesn't know anything about herself. Then she goes for that walk underwater later on. She ends up seeing what Doc Ito's up to, that he's fighting against these cyborg baddies and everything. And then it just shifts to that darker tone, which I thought they did really well, to be honest. And I also saw a criticism that somebody said that she never lost. She never lost a fight and all that. And look, she was extremely highly powered in this film, but she did lose. She did lose, in my opinion, in that fight in the sewer system. When the guy's got the 5 tentacles, and that was an awesome fight scene. But to me, she did lose something there, and she was down and out. And in the end, she lost Hugo. So it's a bit different to, don't think this person was calling her a Mary Sue exactly, but just that some of the emphasis was lost on her victories because she never lost. But for me, I didn't really see that. What I saw was that, yes, she was very highly powered, but she was also at the time learning how to use that power, learning what she could do and what she was capable of. And she did have losses along the way. But what I did feel like was there wasn't a huge, big climactic battle at the end that she was really, up against it and then had to overcome it. What I felt like was she had a battle, but then what it was really doing was setting up for another film where we're going to get more battles and see more of her character explored.
Well, to that point, I necessarily never agreed with that opinion myself, because I've heard that as well too in my comment section for my own review. And I said, look, there are different kinds of losses. People also forget the emotional loss. She did lose all of her unit, all of her people when she gets their memories back. Like you said, she lost the love of her life. She took, in my opinion, she took a loss when she fought that robot guy initially. She wasn't ready. And the movie illustrated that well, because yes, she took out all of those bounty hunters initially, but she wasn't ready, or she was overconfident when she went into that fight in the sewer system, right? Her overconfidence almost killed her. So she did lose, and she wasn't perfect, because that was all illustrated well. She was over emotional in that moment and wasn't thinking, and that directly affected the outcome of that battle. So, like, you do see the character growth. You do see not only physically but emotionally the big losses that she suffers. This character, to me, is probably one of the best at that time period, as far as in what seems like a short span of time to like have so much growth. She does, and you can physically, emotionally, and mentally see that. Even with the love story, you could see how she learns like the proper etiquette. Like, you don't rip your heart out of your chest and be like, man, I'll give this to you. No, that's figure of speech. That's not literal, Alita. You don't need to be giving people your heart.
Well,
But I mean,
yeah.
so I think in this movie, more than any movie that came out, you do actually see a whole lot of growth, and it's amazing. They make it work in that time frame, and you can believe it because of the fact of everything she goes through. She doesn't just like lose physically either. She has those back and forths, with the
Yeah.
doctor, and and you can kind of hear in the beginning where she's kind of a child about things, and then as the movie progresses, she kind of starts to understand more about what it is to have the powers, what her responsibility is, and things like that. And I felt it all the way through. So I always hate that argument, like, oh, she was just kind of,
Yeah.
overpowered. And it's like, plus two, she has a reason to be. She's a cyborg.
Yeah, exactly. Well, look,
I mean,
yeah, no, you're right. It's like she did kind of have that Uncle Ben moment, where he was probably,
yeah,
he was
he
a thought
did.
bubble. But yeah, I agree. I mean, just quickly, Marcellus Durden at 182 says, really loved the first act and world building. Yeah, I agree with you, and thanks for the comment as well. Yeah, I think, I don't want to talk about Captain Marvel much because maybe we'll do a review of that one day. But the
Oh
only reason I'm
God.
going to talk about it is because the two came out at the same time, and like you said before, very similar essential storylines. But the big difference for me was that Alita, a CGI character, went through true character development in 2 hours. With Captain Marvel, I felt like where she started in the beginning was also where she ended. Though you can
Yeah,
argue that there was some minor changes or whatever, but internally, her actual character didn't go through any real growth. So the only thing that really changed for her was that she broke out of whatever restriction they had on her, and her full powers were available to her. But in terms of her actual character, she didn't go through any development. We saw Alita going through different states of emotion, like you said, and actually learning to deal with those emotions along the way. And she was flawed. She had problems. She, had all of these questions and trying to figure out who she was and all of that kind of stuff. And it's that growth that really makes characters like her endearing to the audience, because we feel that as we're going along the journey with her.
if you're a parent or if you know people who have kids or whatever else, honestly, this character feels like a kid, and I have a feeling that's kind of the thing that Rodriguez and Cameron were going for. Was she feels from the moment she wakes up, she feels like a child that's growing. Granted, quicker than any of human kids, but it feels like a child entering the world and learning these things, and even learning hard lessons, probably a little bit younger, even though essentially she's not. She's probably older than anyone else on that world. But until she gets her memories back, it feels like just a newborn learning and taking everything in and being defiant and stuff like that, because they want to do all of these things, with the parent telling them, no, don't do that, and they're like, I'm going to do it anyways because I want to. That's it. And that's not a bad thing when it's done this way, because it feels real and organic, like this person who's growing up, going through these things, and then by the end of it, they become the person that they are. And I think that's the difference, because once again, I hate comparing it, but the only good reference point we have for the time frame is Captain Marvel, right? Captain Marvel is already an adult, so her character development has to be different, right? And it doesn't feel like that. It feels like there's no effort to really make her change emotionally, whereas Alita, when she wakes up and you see her and she's learning all of these new things, it feels like someone just coming into the world and being thrown into the situation that they don't know, and they got to learn everything on the fly while trying to figure out who they are. And who can't relate to that theme? Who can't relate to someone trying to figure out where their place is in the world? I think that's why this movie works so well, is that a lot of people can identify with Alita's struggle, because her struggle is quite literally trying to figure out where she fits in. Like,
Yeah, and to be able to achieve that in essentially a CGI film is really speaks volumes for Cameron and Rodriguez. They did a really good job with portraying all of that in a completely CGI world, really. And I agree. Yes, she feels like a child, and they definitely were going for that, because Christoph Waltz, Dr. Ito, and her character, like, she's essentially the replacement daughter for him and Jennifer Connelly. So that father-daughter relationship is there, and whether it's obviously not a direct relationship, but the two of them together, she wakes up, he's the first person that she sees, and he's guiding her along the way, and he's actually he's looking after her and things like that. And and then it flips around, and when she realizes who she is and what power she has, she looks after him as well. So that to me is the strongest connection in the movie, and it's probably one of the best themes of the movie as well. And don't get me wrong, I really love the action too. I'm sitting there going like, the rollerball scene, I'm like, yeah, this is great. I'm enjoying this. Just with all who doesn't love a game of rollerblading with ginormous bandsaws and weapons and
yeah,
all this kind of stuff,
yeah.
and people being utterly destroyed. So that stuff was all very cool as well. Something I did want to touch on though a little bit, if you're happy to, is Now, we talk about this probably each week, but redundant tomatoes. Did you have a chance to see what the score was for this? Because I had a look earlier.
I saw it back when they came out. I don't know how much the metrics changed since then, considering all of the heat, but I do know that the critics way pan this film. Like,
Yeah,
way.
that is
And
true.
I'm sure you're going to read reviews before we get into that, but I know that their reviews had nothing to do with the movie itself, or they didn't give a reason within the film, like I've stated my gripes, right? And they're pretty concise. You could be like, yeah, I see your point. These guys, they do what the shills do, and they completely like use big words and all that shit to basically say, "Oh, Captain Marvel's out at this point, and we got our
Yeah.
horse back here, so we can't help you, Cameron, even though you've created some films we've praised. But
So
you got two powerful female characters, we can't do it. And what up, Shadow Man? Because of it, yeah. So I do know the metrics were way different, like
yeah,
way
so
off.
for a film like this, you know, it's probably as everyone would expect, but it's 61% of critics. Sorry, out of 316 reviews, the score from critics was 61%, and the audience score from 33,000 ratings was 92%. So,
Yeah, I was
you
saying,
can.
yep, that metrics hasn't changed. You want to hear something funny though? If I remember correctly, uh, from when this first came out, that was actually lower because it was like a 50 or something. I know it was, if it wasn't fresh, it was barely on that line when it first came out.
Yeah. Well, just to read a couple, I'm not going to read a lot, but just to read a couple from Redundant Tomatoes, as I so like to call it. This one says, it suffers because, like most of the Cameron stories, it's not a deep story, and unfortunately, the special effects are really strong, but they are not revolutionary. Oh, man. So, hang
Whoa,
on.
hold
Well,
on.
hang on. The first
Oh, I'm
line,
sorry.
it
What?
suffers because, like most of the Cameron stories, it's not a deep story. Is he kidding himself? Has he never seen Terminator 2? And I don't care what anybody says. Terminator 2 has depth. So this guy can absolutely get bent. Anyway, carry on. What were you going to say?
I was just gonna make that point. Like, you're saying Cameron, wasn't he? Didn't he do Titanic? I mean, what do you mean he doesn't make? Dude, no one in this world. I'll tell you something right now. No one watches Titanic unless Leo and Winslet are in that film. And you can sit there and say you don't like Titanic, but you're lying to me. You're lying to me. Y'all like Titanic. Y'all remember the people going down with the ship. Okay, you've seen it. And why have you seen it? Because that movie has depth. That's why, literally and figuratively. So this is the, oh my God, this is the thing that pisses. Yeah, continue, man. That's ridiculous. Oh, I
Okay,
can't
so
believe they said that.
all right, so another one says, I loved watching this sci-fi spectacle's moving parts. I just couldn't get past its brain. Okay, that's yep, that doesn't really tell me anything. Um, Next guy says, attending the movies should not come with homework assignments. And if a film only works if you study its backstory in advance, there is something terribly wrong. Well, I watched it for the first time not knowing anything about the manga or anything else, and I completely got it, and it was fun.
And hold
So,
on a second before you continue. Uh, Star Wars, anyone? Rise of Skywalker? They say this about this movie, right? But Last Jedi and The Rise of Trash, you literally still have books coming out that go, oh, you want to get this point in the movie that you didn't get, during the movie? Read this book. Luke Skywalker just came out with a Jedi book that explains why this plot point and this plot point didn't. These are the same guys who would turn around and praise that.
yep, yep, 100%. It's ridiculous. All right, I'll just read one more. Basically, we're talking about a lot of human heads doing a lot of insulting and quipping and grunting and groaning, while atop all manner of fighting cyborg bodies. Oh, man. Again, you're not really critiquing the film, my friend. What you're doing is just explaining how you saw it, which was that there was cyborgs in it and there was fighting. I mean, if that's really all you saw, I don't know how you're a top critic. But anyways, that's what the critics said, and we had 61% rotten ratings for the critics and a 92% rating from users, which is you, me, and every other normal person in the universe who overall, with some critiques, some little nitpicks, actually enjoyed the film.
This this is my thing, man. This is my thing is that if a critic was to come out and say, "Hey, I don't like this film," cool. If they gave me a sensible, logical kind of a reason, like when we talk about it back and forth, and I'm sure even people in the comment sections who have been listening to this can agree, they've understood every point that we've made, whether it's a nitpick or not. If they came out and said that, but here's the reason, and I've said this before about Chilling Tomato, is that they know, and it's the biggest thing that pisses me off about critics today. They know what's a good and bad movie. They know this thing is not as terrible as they want it to be because they're backing the Captain Marvel racehorse, but they can't say it or they don't want to admit it. So they got to bog it down with one thing they're going to pick out of the film to dislike, and that's going to be the point they run with. Like, really? You can get behind the cyborg action? Why the fuck are you watching a cyber movie then? Like, what would be
Yeah.
your critique of Blade Runner then? What would be your critique of any other good movie that what's your critique on Terminator? That has cyborgs in it. There's cyborg fighting. So that's a
Well,
terrible
mate,
movie.
you forgot. You forgot. It's James Cameron, so there's no depth. No depth. James Cameron, just special effects, nothing else. Well,
I mean,
that actually takes me to a question that I had for you because we've got 8 minutes left. So I had a question for you. Do you want to see a sequel to Alita?
absolutely. Look, I fall in the camp of while I won't put this movie on the level of us shilling for Joker or you know a Last Samurai or anything like that. I think this movie deserves and it's earned the right to tell its story. I think that it's set up for what could be a actual great film. I feel like this to me feels like when you start building a house, right? It laid down the foundation, it laid down the groundwork for a solid story, and that
Hmm.
necessarily the first story wasn't meant to be this great transcendent kind of a thing. It was what first movies are supposed to do: get you
Hmm.
interested so you want to see a sequel, and then they can build upon the themes and the stories and the things that they started in this first movie. I mean, they
Hmm.
teased Edward Norton. Don't tease me with my homie Edward Norton and tell me that we ain't gonna see it. I mean, I refuse to believe that Edward Norton has a 5 second cameo for no reason whatsoever. Like,
Yeah.
it'd be nonsense.
Well, I agree, mate. I think we do need a sequel. I actually think a trilogy is what this is going to be set up for, and it may take a long time because Cameron can take a long time between his movies. But um, we'll get 3 movies, I reckon, because what did you say there was 30 in the manga, 30 volumes
Yep.
ish. So he did the first 10 covering this movie, the first movie. Perhaps we'll get around about the same 10 books covered in the second movie and another 10 for the third movie. Maybe something like that. But I do think in the next one, um, we'll get to see a lot more going on with, like you said, Zolom and Edward Norton, all that. I think we'll see a lot more of that. And then in the third one, I don't know because I haven't read the books, but um, there'll be a full closeout and completely finish the Alita story with the third movie. That's just me. That's just my opinion. What I think Cameron might do with this.
Also, I just want to say, what up, Gary North? He's always here. So We were just going in our back and forth, so I see you there. He said, I enjoyed the movie more than most science fiction movies from the last 10 years. I agree, except for I throw Blade Runner in there too. I thought the sequel was a worthy follow-up. And Cobra Viper 999, welcome to the channel, says, I would rather Alita be a standalone movie. I don't want Disney doing the sequel. And I'm of two opinions. Disney does a movie good if they let the people who created it work on it. And we've seen examples of that. The Mandalorian was very good. These people are directors who are established, so Disney didn't really interfere in that. They kind of just were like, you guys do your own thing, and we'll just make sure that you're putting in some stuff we want, but you have free reign. And I think if you have someone like Cameron, you're not going to tell James Cameron what he's going to do in his movie. He's too big. He's too established. They're not going to be pulling the strings on James. I mean, what do you think, Stevie?
Yeah, I would agree. And look, that's a good point. I'm a big fan of especially these days in the world of sequels, and we get so many movies where we get the first one and we know from the narrative and the plot pacing, everything like that, that it's actually just been created to make sure there's a sequel. So I'm a big fan of standalone films, so I understand that comment. But I just think with what we've gotten so far, what we already got with the first movie, I would like to see at least another one to explore the character and the story some more. And I think Disney should just keep their hands off it, just stay away. Just let Cameron, and whether it's Rodriguez again, let the two of them just do what they need to do and create a good product. Because I think Cameron can do a good story. He can do, obviously, good visuals and all of that, but he needs to be left alone, I think, as well.
And people forget they brought the studio, but they don't have the rights to Alita. They never bought the rights. Cameron has the rights. So this is where the argument gets kind of murky, because that puts him more in the driver's seat than most creators. Star Wars and other products are a little bit different because they came with the company that they brought, right? Ridley Scott and them might have created Aliens or whatever else, but the company owned the rights to the film. James Cameron owns the rights to Alita. That's why you hadn't seen it come out, because he wanted to make it his own way. So I think if Cameron keeps the rights and says, I have control of the rights, but it's under your studio. And I mean, he necessarily can pull it from Fox if he wants to, because they were just where it was distributed. It wasn't, they don't have the rights to the film.
Yeah, well, I believe he bought the rights to it all the way back in 2000. So since 20 years ago, he's had the rights, and he's been, planning it. And he was actually going to do it about 10, 11 years ago, but he decided to do Avatar instead. So, I think that's a really good point, and a really key point is that he actually owns the rights to it. So Disney, then it turns into Disney say, well, we're not going to produce and market the film for you and all of this, but I don't think
James Cameron,
I don't think that will happen with him. That won't happen with James Cameron.
No, if James Cameron goes to any studio, okay, I'm going to tell you folks how this will play out. James Cameron would want Disney to do it, because if you guys think he ain't about that, then you've never seen an interview with him. He's a obnoxious douchebag, but he's a hell of a filmmaker. But I mean, James Cameron is also a smart businessman. He is not going to be the person to bend the knee to mouse. No, he's been in the business, and if you know how he thinks about films and things like that, or if you've seen him on interviews, he's very arrogant, and he wants control of his own product. And this actually works for us as fans, because he's not going to go into a studio. He's not going to sign a contract where he knows people are going to be looking over his shoulder and going, nah, James, you got to cut this out because it's not part of what we want. He'll look at him and be like, well, you can go fuck yourself because it's what I want in my movie. No, he'll go, fine. You guys don't want this? I'll go to another studio and I'll kill the box office, because Disney doesn't have anything coming out. So I mean, he could shop this anywhere. And even if you look at the returns, which we don't know the exact figures, so we don't know if it broke even or not, it still has a following, and the companies are going to take that into consideration. They've revived things for less. So he could shop this anywhere. And because James Cameron's name is attached to it, he could get anyone to make this thing. Anybody will pick this up. I can guarantee you, because they made Terminator, and that shit should have never been made.
Hang on.
Never.
Just be really specific there. Dark Fate should have never been made.
Yeah. Dark Fate. We're not talking OG Terminator.
Yeah, don't go canceling Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 on me. Don't do that. You'll ruin my childhood. But I agree, man. I agree. Unfortunately, like, this has been a really good chat, and it always is. But I today have to really get going. So I think this has been a good talk, and I hope everyone in the chat's enjoyed it as well. We try to get into it as much as we can and be as fair and balanced as we can. But hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time. But Zod, you want to finish us up?
Yeah. So Stevie, you got anything new for us before we hit the go button on here?
No, nothing too new. I've got some new videos, but if there was one I would recommend checking out, it's my review of Da 5 Bloods and why it sucked. So there's a lot of critical acclaim for the Da 5 Bloods, and there's talk of Oscars and all this sorts of stuff. But if you truly just objectively watch the film, it really, really is not good. So of any of my videos, I recommend checking that one out. But other than that, just keep an eye out, and there'll be some more coming out.
And as always, you've been chilling in the Phantom Zone. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Lonely Banter, Shadow Man, Cobra Viper, Gary North, and all the usual suspects. We appreciate having you here. Next week, we don't know what we're going to do because we're going to put a poll up, and you guys are going to decide what we're going to review. So go check out our Twitter. That'll be Stevie J Reviews at twitter.com or General Zod's Phantom Zone, because I'll retweet it. And thank you, everybody, for watching. As always, remember the only rule here in the Phantom Zone, #Black Lives Matter. Bye, everyone.